I'm going to talk about prediction. If you have a silly name like mine, Notredame, which is very, very related to the real name of Nostradamus, which was Michel de Notre-Dame, then you should be serious about predictions. And then we are very serious about predictions in my lab. And you know, if you think about it, prediction is what mankind has been doing forever. We have been trying to predict things forever. And it is not surprising that I'll just take this stuff that will maybe at some point allow me to change slides, but it's gone as well. So you should know that mankind has always been obsessed with prediction. And those of you who have seen Stonehenge is just a prehistorical pocket-sized calendar that is telling you about how long you have to wait for spring to come. Oh, here it is, almost. No, that's not the one. It's not the presentation. Okay. And it so happened that, very, very early on, scientists were also interested in making predictions. And they took this very, very seriously in the 19th century. And if some of you have seen the movie Hysteria, there is a very nice reminder about a discipline called phrenology. Now, phrenology was a great discipline. You had guys with long white beards who were touching the tip of your skull, looking for bumps here and there. And they were predicting you to be a natural-born mathematician, a natural-born killer, or whatever. Many good people ended up in jail, or even worse, ended up being mathematical teachers when they had no clue. And that's how useful phrenology was. That sounds terrible, because it was a total failure. But there is worse to it. This was very good science. The way they were measuring skulls at the time is still the way we measure them today. And what went wrong was not the measurement part of the science. What went wrong was that these measurements were correlated with the wrong quantities. And this is happening all the time in science. And in fact, this is the main problem of science. Measuring the right thing and correlating it with the wrong thing. And this is still happening today. We haven't given up on the idea that we can predict a bit of the future with very, very simple measurements. The latest avatar I can think of is this 2D, 4D ratio. All of you have heard about this in newspapers and all around. You look at the ratio between your ring finger and your index, and this will tell everything about your future. You know, whether you're a very aggressive man, whether you're going to have a heart attack tomorrow, you'll be a gifted piano player, anything. Some of these things are really true, like some of the heart attack risks and so on. Many of these things are based on scientific papers that nobody ever reads before they get reported in the mainstream press. For instance, this is a report on the relation between this ratio and aggressivity. Some of you may not be familiar with this kind of things, but if the correlation was real, all the dots will be along a nice straight line. If there is no correlation, it's a nice circular cloud. What do you think this is? A straight line or a cloud? But anyway, it doesn't matter. This stuff gets reported, and before you know it, it's in the whole world's newspaper, taken for reality. What is the latest incarnation of this? Well, it's a real problem this time. The most sophisticated trait we can measure in humans these days is the genome, is the kind of genetic variation, mutations we have across people. Some companies like 23andMe do this for you. You spit in a tube, you send it somewhere in California, and then you receive your genome by mail and your future. Now, don't take me wrong. If you're interested in your ancestry, and especially if you come from Northern or Southern America, extraordinary tool. It is going to tell you things that are really, really interesting. If you are interested in your health, it's pretty useless, and this has been shown, except for a few traits that have been known for a long time, like some specific rare type of breast cancer. It is pretty useless from a medical point of view. The information you're going to get from this is quite useless. And this is a real problem. This is actually something that is challenging the whole field of genetics these days. I learned when I was at school that it was just a matter of sequencing all the genomes, and then we would correlate them with observations, and we would know what is the reason for one phenotype or another. There is a very nice example emphasizing this failure, the height paradox. If I take anybody in this assembly and I ask you for the height of all your relatives, brothers, sisters, and so on, I will be able to predict your heights within 5 centimeters, which says that height is genetics. And we know this, it's 80% genetics. If I give you a tube and I send this tube to 23andMe and I try to predict your height from that tube, then I will be correct, plus or minus 30 centimeters, which is, you know, it's 1 or 2 hobbits, something like this. So it's not good. But then again, think about it. Height, what is height? Height is only a number. It's a single number. And we are expecting that everybody having the same number will have the same genes behind this number. And look at this beautiful picture. I was looking for male and women side by side, but only found these 2 nice ladies. They have exactly, maybe my browsing is biased, I don't know. They have exactly the same height. But look at how far away, look at how far away are their belly buttons, like 10 centimeters. How can you expect that a single number will summarize these 2 ladies? And how can you expect that they should have behind in their genome exactly the same mutations explaining the same height? Height is clearly more complicated than what we see. And a single number cannot be enough to describe such a variety. And I want to give you another image on this. I started this talk talking about correlation. You take one quantity, you take another quantity, and then you try to draw correlation. That's how all these studies are being made. There is a critical aspect that is often overlooked. In both of these quantities, you must have roughly the same amount of information. Now, if I were measuring the height of everybody on Earth, I could put these numbers in a single file that would hold on 1 USB key. That's about 8 grams of information. Information is weightless, but it's 8 grams, a small USB key. If I were sequencing all the genes, the 26 genes that have been shown to be associated with height, and putting the genes of everybody in the world in USB keys, I will need to have 80 kilograms of USB keys. That's much more than you fit in your backpack. And we are now trying to correlate these 2 quantities, 8 grams of data versus 80 kilograms of data. It cannot work. We need to have more sophisticated ways of measuring phenotypes. And that's where this talk links with the brain and with the fact that if we want to understand the genetics behind the brain, for instance, we have to go into longitudinal phenotypes. Now, this is a longitudinal recording. Those of you who play with the Wii PlayStation have seen this before. This is a personal one because it's mine. It's every morning my Wii monitors my weight, and these days it's telling me every day that I'm overweight, and it's going to tell my wife. And effectively, it tells my wife, and then we have these discussions for lunch, and it's a very entertaining piece of equipment. Why is this so nice, and why is it much more interesting than having only my average weight? Well, as you probably know, many diseases start with a very rapid loss of weight, like cancer, for instance. And I can very much imagine that this PlayStation may have inside a model that will recognize my weight decreasing too fast. Long before I realize, you realize you're losing weight when you have lost 5, 6 kilograms. Maybe at 2, 3 kilograms, you may already guess that something is wrong enough so that the Wii may either tell you you should go for a checkup or even phone directly your GP and tell this guy should need a checkup, okay? This is how useful this kind of things could be. And if you think about battling a disease like cancer, 2 or 3 months may make a difference between life or death. So this kind of longitudinal analysis, very, very easy one to get, very cheap to get, could make a huge difference in our life. We could have done this in the Middle Ages. This kind of measurements are very easy to do. But what has changed is the combination of technology and networking are now making these things usable. So how does this relate with human? Well, before we go there, we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to compare this data? I know how to compare weights. You measure one person, you measure another one, and you have the weight. But I don't know how to compare these longitudinal analyses. To do this, I have to do something called modeling. And we are going to start with mice. This funny machine lives in the lab of Mara Diersen here, and it's a machine that is extraordinary because for up to 6 weeks, it can record everything a single mouse is eating, drinking, every movement the mouse makes, and very soon I hope even what the mouse thinks. That's how sophisticated these things are. And the recordings look like this. So these are 3 days in the life of a mouse, and you can tell the nights and the days. Mice are nocturnal animals. They eat during the night. So this is why you have these sort of stripes that indicate the duration of the meal. Now, Mara has this torture for mice. She gives them what I understand is the equivalent of heroin for mice, chocolate. So these are the mice chocolate. When you give free access to chocolate to mice, they gradually stop feeding in a normal way. And you can tell the difference here. You can tell that these mice, the mice that are given chocolate, they are beginning to eat during the day, and they are beginning to have smaller and smaller meals. They are getting addicted. I don't know if you realize it, but what we see here, all this figure, is something beautiful. It is the beginning of an addiction. We have visualized through longitudinal analysis how addiction is starting. If we could quantify this, then it means that we could know how fast it is happening, and we may even be able to prevent it from happening. Let's look again at the data. What we have here are on one side the abnormal meals, and on the other side the normal meals. And by eye, we can tell that the mouse is switching from feeding in an abnormal way, compulsive, and feeding in a normal way, non-compulsive. This is very much like if we had two mice in one. We have a compulsive mouse and a non-compulsive mouse, and they keep alternating. There is only one mouse in the cage, but it changes behavior from time to time. We are lucky because in biology we have a wonderful tool for this kind of analysis. This is called a hidden Markov model. A hidden Markov model, you have all been using it because this is what you use when you do phone recognition in your smartphone. And it's very simple. It relies on the idea that on one side we have some data, and that this data has been emitted by a hidden model. And for speech recognition, the data is a sound wave. And what your computer does, or your mobile phone, is that it tries to figure out which word was the most likely to emit this sound wave or that sound wave. It's quite difficult because we have 40,000 words that are hidden and have potentially emitted the sound wave. In the case of the mice, it's very, very easy. We only have two words. We have the normal word and the abnormal word. And all we need to do is to figure out if this meal pattern was most likely to have been emitted. You see, you have all the short meals by the normal mode of the mouse or by the abnormal mode of the mouse. What are we going to do with this data? Why would this be a useful data? Where does this lead us? It leads us to something that is essential. And this is an idea on which we are working at the moment. It leads us to quantification. It allows us to see patterns of abnormalities that are gradually emerging. And what is very interesting is that we may see these patterns emerging long before they have had any consequence on the phenotype of the mouse. The mouse will eventually become overweight, but if we can quantify after a few days how strong the pattern of loss of control is kicking in, then we are sometimes able to predict how overweight the mouse is going to be in 6 weeks. And this, as you imagine, has very, very strong consequences because it means that just through the observation of very early behavior, we can now be predictive. We can predict what is going to happen to the mouse, and if you are predicted, you can prevent. And if you can prevent, of course, you can hopefully correct in time. And this is really what longitudinal analyses are bringing us to. These devices that make it possible to monitor mice in real time are very complex devices. And the reason we haven't been doing this before is because we did not have these devices. And even setting up, fixing up these devices is still a lot of work, but it is certainly worth it. And now you may ask, but how about us? How about human? Are we going to have to build huge cages where you're going to connect your fridge or whatever to the computer or what? Well, I have some news for you. Everybody in this audience has an equipment that will allow them to be monitored in real time if they want to. And in fact, each time you download an iPhone application, and this application asks, are you allowing me to monitor your position? The guys behind are actually using hidden Markov models to figure out something about you, not to cure you, be assured, just to know exactly what to sell you. But where they can massage their market, they could also cure you. This one is a special one. It just came out a few days ago. There was some report. It's an Israeli smartphone that is able to do everything. Of course, it has a GPS. It knows where you are and all the stuff. It also has sensors, so it can follow your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your temperature, and it has also capacities to follow your cognitive state. We rarely think about it, but the way you use your mobile phone is telling a lot about your cognitive state. And I'm sure very, very simple data mining will be enough to tell how many times you were drunk last month, for instance. So these kind of things can very, very easily be followed using the kind of longitudinal recording that are actually being recorded now in our society. So this is lots of scientific work is beginning to come out on these kind of things. And this is a pretty nice study that came out a while ago, just following teenagers and trying to correlate the spatial GPS patterns with the onset of obesity. You know that obesity is the main pandemic faced by the world today, by the rich and the poor alike. Everybody is getting overweight. And if we can identify this in teenagers, and if we can prevent it early enough, then this will be a major improvement. So to wrap up all these things, what do we have here? We have a wonderful tool that is going to allow us to diagnose your disease long before you have them, hopefully, to monitor complex disease. There are many illnesses, especially neuropsychiatric disorder, where you have long periods where you're fine, and suddenly you have a relapse. If using longitudinal analysis, we could identify the patterns associated with the early stage of the relapse, we could save a lot of pain to a lot of people. We will also be in a position to validate new medicines, things that are normally very, very difficult because they have very subtle effect to follow in standard trials could be followed this way. Of course, we will be able to monitor the effectiveness of a treatment, how good is a treatment for you. And this is a bit of science fiction, the adaptation of your environment, making sure that your environment knows about your stress level and adapts it through a few parameters like light, sounds, and so on. Every good thing has a wrong side. And in that case, you have to think that what I'm describing is a perfect strategy to monitor people, for good or for bad. And I want to finish this seminar on a kind of philosophical note. I do not know any example in history where technological improvement has not had a potential, has not been a potential threat for personal liberties. For a simple reason. When you have a novel technique, those who are able to use these techniques against the people are usually the most powerful, and they can do this. This is not a fatality. We have two solutions against this. Either we shell ourselves from technological improvement, and some communities do this. I think it will be sad. We have gained like 40 years of life expectancy in 200 years because of technological innovation. So it's worth to fight for technological innovation. And if we want to fight for technological innovation, which we should in this case, it is down to us to make sure that our civil liberties are kept intact. How? There is a very simple solution. And this solution is called democracy. And I think I want to finish on this key idea that technological innovation cannot benefit to mankind in a non-democratic system. Innovation and democracy have to go hands in hands. And I cannot think of any limit to this key concept. Thanks for your attention.